Hi everybody. Let's talk about making a double exposure image in Photoshop. It's a pretty simple technique you can use to make an interesting combo photo out of a couple different pictures. All right, so let's pick up this little Mandalorian sample image that I found, and we'll use it to make our little combination. So we're starting with a JPEG image, and our goal, let me show you what our goal is going to be. We're going to try to make this, where we want to show kind of a superimposed image over the top of Mandalorian. We want to show the Razor Crest there, peeking through the Mandalorian's armor in this kind of double exposure scenario. So we can play around with this by separating the image into layers and using some different layer combinations that I'm going to show you. So let's go back to this image and start with this and make an edit. So the first thing we need to do, as you can see, this is a flattened picture, is I need to isolate the Mandalorian from the background. I need to separate him out so that I can play around with some of these effects. All right, because to be able to put the Razor Crest picture inside the shape of the Mandalorian, I need to make a selection and create that silhouette. So what I'm going to do is start up with the quick selection tool, and I'm going to brush around his armor and start picking up his silhouette from this photo, and do my best to kind of pick out the armor, pick out his costume, his tunic, and make sure that I don't step into the background. Now, this isn't the best quality photo that I stole off the internet, so it doesn't have really high-res corners and edges. If you're working with a better quality picture, you're going to get a better selection than this little sample image is going to give us. But we'll do our best with what we've got. All right, so I think I've gone around and picked up, just get that little spot outside of his armpit there. I think we've got the majority of the silhouette, maybe a little more on his shoulder. And that's going to be a good way to get that in line with the selection we need. Okie dokie. So now what we're going to do is, oops, I keep tipping into that background. I'm going to undo that. All right, so good enough. Now what I want to do is extract the Mandalorian from that layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply make a copy and then a paste. And so what that did, if I turn off the background layer, you'll see is I copied and pasted that selection, that Mandalorian silhouette, into this new area, into this new layer. And that's exactly what I need to do the next step. Now, between the background layer, which is the original, and the new copy, I can create a new blank layer and go ahead and fill that with white. So I'm going to go ahead here and click on the white swatch, just kind of drag and drop it in there. And that's going to make that white layer that I needed in between the Mandalorian and the original background picture. And that's okay just to leave that. In fact, that extra layer I didn't need. I'll go ahead and drop that. Okay, so want to make sure that I've selected the Mandalorian, which is the top layer. That's the selected, isolated image by itself. Okay, now let's get into the magic. I'm going to open up the Razor Crest picture, and I'm going to copy it. So I'll do Command A, which is select all, Command C, which is copy. Then I'm going to go back to that Mandalorian picture I've been working on, and I'm going to say Command V or Control V, which is paste. All right, so now that picture is inside my new Photoshop file. Now I just need to scale it. So I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and I'm going to Transform and Scale it. Just going to stretch it. Actually, I'm not going to stretch it. I'm going to scale it. Stretching is a bad idea. Always looks bad. Just going to kind of reposition it until I get it to where it's somewhere in the vicinity of the silhouette I know is underneath. So I'm going to hit Return, which is going to finish the scaling of that image. And now I'm ready to superimpose this over the image underneath. Now this is my favorite little trick for superimposing two pictures. And the reason we had to isolate the Mandalorian on his own layer. If you hover your cursor over the dividing line between layer 2 and layer 1, we can make what's called a quick mask by merging, not actually merging, but by using the silhouette of the bottom layer to collapse around the image of the top layer. So notice how when I hold Option or Alt on my keyboard and I hover the cursor over the dividing line between the two layers, I get a little down arrow. That little down arrow is basically going to mask layer 2 into the silhouette of layer 1. All right, and so you see that now, how the picture has now embedded itself inside that silhouette. Now we can play around with blending modes and see how they create that superimposed effect we wanted to make. So let's try experimenting with these. Multiply, darken, I don't think those are going to do it. We want something like lighten, or maybe screen, color dodge, soft light, maybe a little too dark. I really do kind of like how lighten and screen look. Let's try screen. That one looks pretty good. And that one's kind of like halfway in between. You see the Mandalorian, but then you also see the ship behind him. You can further modify that by adjusting the opacity. Maybe you can lower the opacity a little bit and bring up the picture a little more. Kind of go back and forth. You could do that maybe with one of the other modifications like lighten. Same thing, you could test out that transparency. And that's a really great way to make that multi-level kind of double exposure image in your Photoshop file. Now, you can always make additional edits, like let's say you had a third picture you wanted to blend in there. Same thing, as long as you do the little down arrow trick, you can merge that into the silhouette of the bottom of the pile image and make those multi-layer combinations. All right, so hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can do this kind of a double exposure and play around with your images. All right, thanks for listening. See you next time.